you finish what you were saying, and then we'll go to Kyle.
So you mentioned the tax cut, which I'm really happy to talk about. 22 million families, so over 80 million Americans have an extra $1,000 in their pocket this year, thanks to the largest middle-class tax cut in American history. This is one of the most misrepresented pieces of legislation in our country's history. I have to listen to the Democrats time and time again say this just was a handout for corporations and a handout for the richest of these. That is incorrect. This is the largest, most successful middle-class tax cut in American history. Fact, a family of four with an annual income of $73,000, which is the median family income in America, saw a tax cut of more than $2,000, a 58% reduction in taxes, thanks to President Donald J. Trump. And so you care about middle-class workers. I care about middle-class workers. President Donald Trump has actually delivered results and success for the people that we care about, the middle part of this country that trusted them with their vote for the first time in a long time. I'm so proud that this president is able to say, I've made life better for people that both parties have turned their back on for so long.
Okay, so here we go. Now, so if you want the truth about that tax cut bill, let's talk about it. First of all, will I give credit in certain areas? Absolutely, because I'm not a hack. So when it comes to, I'm not saying you are, by the way, I'm just saying that I'm not one.
Thank you, Tom.
So the good parts of that bill, the child tax credit went from $1,000 to $2,000. That's something we can agree on.
Good.
That's a good thing. The standard deduction was increased. That's a good thing as well. By the way, I like how we're both super tall and these mics are so low. It's so awkward to have to...
It's got to be like that presidential, it's got to keep leaning over.
All right, so now let's get into it. That's the good part. That's the stuff I agree with. Here's the bad part, okay? In 1952, the corporate tax rate, it accounted for 33% of all federal tax revenue. Okay, you understand that? So the corporate tax accounted for 33% of all federal tax revenue. Today, corporate taxes only bring in about 8% of that federal revenue. So that means a giant tax cut for corporations. Trump looked at that and said, we should give them a bigger cut. So the rate went from 35% to 21%. That cost more than $1.3 trillion. Also, this bill scrapped a little thing called the alternative minimum tax. So what that means is that if there's a rich person who's got a team of lobbyists and a team of accountants trying to help them dodge taxes, okay? Let's say they get that rate down to 14%, their effective rate. The alternative minimum tax says, no, you have to pay a minimum of 25%. You can't deduct below that 25% number. This bill got rid of that because it wants the ultra-rich to take all the money and run out the back door. If this bill was not for helping the rich, then why is it that they took the estate tax, which only applies to people with goddamn estates, and they said, hey, $5.5 million is the line, how about we make that $11 million? So in other words, a tax that only impacted the rich, he said, well, let's cut that one quite a bit as well. And furthermore, and the most important point about this bill is that people making $75,000 a year or less will actually see a tax increase over a decade. So what happened was all of the tax cuts for regular people, all the tax cuts for you, they're temporary, but the tax cuts for corporations and the rich, they're permanent.
I'll let you respond in the context, because we're going to stay on the economy, because you've both addressed a lot of the key points. But one point
you don't even need to be here. We could just keep going.
But one point we did not address is the deficits and the debt. So if you can just address that in your response as well.
I mean, you're going to find no disagreement that the debt and deficit is one of the most urgent issues of our time. And look, President Trump has submitted budget after budget to Congress that would balance over 5 to 10 years. And look, Kyle and I will agree on this. One of the ways that we can balance our budget is ending these silly and reckless and morally objectionable foreign occupations of countries that we shouldn't be in. We can agree on this. And by the way, 2 things to this, done with an elite force of foreign fighters, thanks to President Trump's asymmetrical foreign policy. The leader of ISIS is dead in the last 24 hours. That's the thing that we should applaud. And by the way, that was done with an elite fighting force, no need for a foreign occupation. We can both applaud, the death of an ISIS leader that was totally and completely evil. And so, look, the debt and deficit, I'll tell you, we need dramatic spending cuts, and we need to, shrink the size and scope of government. We can talk about that at length. I think we're here tomorrow to talk about things that are happening in real time with President Donald Trump. I want to make 3 points about what Kyle said about the tax bill. Number 1, Republicans in Congress tried to make the tax cuts permanent, and the Democrats objected to it. They filibustered it, and they never allowed it to happen. That's number 1. So I agree that the tax cuts were not permanent for the middle-income workers, but it was the Democrats that prevented it from actually becoming permanent in the last 18 months. Number 2, you talk about corporate tax rates and the percentage of the budget. Well, for those of us that understand and have studied the Laffer curve, we're actually seeing revenues go up. We have record numbers of revenues in the federal government go up because...
Then why is the deficit growing?
Well, it's going because we're also increasing spending on ridiculous foreign occupation wars, something that I'm against. Okay, so we'll agree on that. We're increasing spending, but we're also cutting taxes, so I'm a big believer that we should cut taxes and cut government. So if you're gonna... My philosophy is quite consistent. I think that it's better in the people's money when they earn it, it's not government's money to take it. But the second thing I want to make is this, is that the size of the corporate tax rate, as it was lowered, so it was lowered from 38% to about 22%, we're actually seeing compliance go up. So you cited the 1950s. So the 1950s tax rate was marginally ineffective, two different things, but it was only over 90%, right? And
No, I'm talking about the corporate tax. I wasn't talking about the marginal tax rate.
Oh, you're not in the, okay, I stand corrected. Then the individual, the corporate tax was about 40%, 50% in the 1950s? But
Right, it accounted for 33% of all federal tax rates.
Right, so now we don't have the numbers yet in, but it was 8% last year. It's projected to exceed over 13 to 15% because now corporations are complying with the actual federal tax rates, because that's what happens when you lower the tax rates. Less people put their money overseas, and more people comply with the actual laws on the books. The third thing,
hold on,
I want to get to some philosophy really
I'll let
quick.
you respond just real quick. The effective rate went from 23% to 12%, so that's not true. The effective rate went down
You mean
under Donald Trump.
corporation or individual?
Corporate.
12% for corporate tax rate?
Yes, the effective corporate tax rate went from 23%
Good. No, I mean,
to
it
12%.
should be 0%, but yeah, that's perfectly fine.
That's a very unpopular position. Please proceed.
Yeah, no, and I'm happy to elaborate on it. This is a bigger philosophical point, and this is where Kyle and I will find no agreement whatsoever, respectfully. Is it our money or is it government's money? And that's a really important discussion to have, because you frame this as the creation of wealth is somewhat of a bad thing. I'm not going to try to mislabel what you're saying, but just because someone got rich does not mean anyone got poor. In order to get rich in a market society, means you have to employ people, you have to have a good idea, you have to voluntarily sell it over a long period of time, people have to purchase that product, you have to continue to prove yourself, you have to probably buy property or rent property, you have to get money flowing through the economy. Just because someone got rich does not mean they went around and stole the money away from people. Wealth creation in a market society requires innovation, entrepreneurship, something that makes every single person in this room richer. So when someone gets rich in a market society, they did not pillage and plunder and get that money with putting guns to people's heads. Instead, they were creative, they were entrepreneurs, and they were innovative, something that should be rewarded. And so that's where the philosophical difference is. You look at wealth creation as something that might be bad. I don't want to mislabel it, but your preferred presidential candidate says billionaires should not exist. I believe that every single person in this room that is using an iPhone, that goes to Amazon.com and uses Google and Facebook, your life has been made better thanks to the profit incentive that only someone that can become a billionaire is made possible. A market economy is the greatest, most assured way to create wealth for all people. Socialism is much more about hating the rich than helping the poor. I yield my time to Kyle.
Okay, well, allow me to steal from your favorite, well, he's president now, but wrong. So, look, I just want to test your theory real quick on wealth creation here. So, I'm going to give you two facts. I just want a yes or no answer. Jeff Bezos has over $150 billion. There are 50,000 homeless veterans in this country. If you could take 1% of his money to end homelessness for veterans, would you do it?
I hope he gives it voluntarily. I will not put a gun to his head.
That's a no.
I'll tell you why. First of all, that's a false choice. That's a false choice. Let me tell you why.
It's a thought experiment,
Because
bro.
we have spent hundreds of billions of dollars to try to solve homelessness by taking money from the rich over the last 40 years. You want to solve homelessness? Stop electing Democrats to city like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle.